Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to the first portion of looking at the historical Jesus. And I have down here below a portrait of Jesus, the questions, is the Christ of faith the Jesus of history, or who really was Jesus of Nazareth? And I do want to mention there was a historical Jesus to kind of emphasize that point a little bit further. I do not know one credible scientist, not one, that holds that the world is 6,000 years old. Likewise, I do not know one credible historian, not one, that holds that Jesus of Nazareth did not exist. Now, I want to add something to that point because you do have individuals. You can go to the great scholarly encyclopedia known as Wikipedia and do a search for what's known as the Christ myth theory, which basically tries to argue that Jesus of Nazareth did not exist. That is considered a fringe theory. And to think of it in one perspective, if you were to ask 200, I was going to say 100, but I think 100 would be too small of a number. If you were to ask 200 credible historians if Jesus of Nazareth did not exist, you might find one, maybe two, that would argue in favor of that. But when those individuals are then, confronted with the evidence that shows, to the contrary, that he was a historical figure, then I notice that those same individuals will always backtrack and they'll say, okay, yeah, there was an actual Jesus of Nazareth that started this whole thing we call Christianity, but we just don't find that what's in the Gospels is reliably information about him. But they acknowledged his existence. So, like I said, I don't know one credible scientist, not one, that holds that the world is 6,000 years old. Likewise, I don't know one credible historian, not one, that holds that Jesus of Nazareth did not exist. But moving forward with the historical Jesus, and a couple points to know, 3 points to know here actually. One is that for the majority of its history, the idea of a historical Jesus was not something that the church was concerned with. So, for the majority of, the Christian faith community, the Christian church, the idea of them following Herodias's methods of determining the historical Jesus was not something that they were, focused on. I mean, certainly, yes, they knew, that there were faith elements, to him. The notion that he was, pre-existent before his birth, that he was born of a virgin, he was God incarnate, he rose from the dead. I mean, they knew that these were elements of the realm of faith, but the notion of, say, breaking down and separating, okay, what we can verify versus what, would be in the realm of faith was not something they were looking at. It was just one complete history. And you wouldn't start to see, tackling Jesus like any other figure in history as, okay, here's what we can verify, here's what's in harmony with the natural world, following Herodias's methods of, conducting history. You wouldn't start to see this until, I would say, at earliest the 18th century, and then you saw it more in the 19th century, and on we would go. Well, when it comes to history, no one gospel or source is given automatic priority over the other. I've touched on this a little bit with what I've said so far in my lecture videos over the New Testament. How, I've mentioned, say, a non canonical gospel, be it, the Gospel of Infancy Thomas or the Gospel of Infancy James, that those gospels may be non canonical, but that doesn't remove their historical importance. So essentially, no one gospel or source is given automatic priority over the other. In this case, a canonical status versus a non canonical status. And when it comes to examining any character in history, the older the text about the particular individual is usually the better. So in this case, with looking at Jesus, the older the text that we would find about him usually would be the better. Because simply put, it's closer to the time period in which he lived. So, kind of continuing on here of the historical Jesus, what does Paul say about Jesus's personal history? And I've mentioned before in a number of my videos the discussion that was held between Richard Dawkins, who's well known for promoting the cause of atheism, and John Huddleston, who is, I haven't looked up his name in a while, but professor of religious studies at College of Charleston. And I don't remember um, exactly the words that were brought up, but Dawkins asked Huddleston a question about, how much did Paul know of Jesus's personal history? And Huddleston responded back, I don't think Paul knew a whole lot about Jesus in terms of his personal history. And arguably a major reason for why is because Paul wasn't concerned. But here are some of the things that Paul does mention regarding the personal history of Jesus. He knows that he was Jewish. In that particular passage in Galatians, Paul mentions how Jesus was born of a woman under the law or the Torah, which of course would state that he was born Jewish. And commentators that I've read on Paul and his writing there in Galatians, I'm not sure if it was Bart Ehrman or if it was Stephen Harris, but they focused on Paul mentioning about how Jesus was born of a woman. And they kind of gave the tongue in cheek response. It makes you wonder what Paul's audience in Galatia thought that the alternative was going to be. But moving forward, Paul knows that Jesus is a descendant of David. So he knows that Jesus is of the Davidic line, whether that's through um, Mary or his father or both. Of course, it mentioned how you can make an argument that Luke's chronology is of his mother, of Mary, but in the Gospel of Infancy James, non-canonical gospel, but talks, about really more Mary's personal history. Mary is referenced as being among the Davidic lineage. That he has a brother slash kinsman named James. So Paul knows that Jesus had a brother slash kinsman named James. He knows that he had a ministry with apostles and disciples. So he's aware of that, a ministry that had apostles and disciples. And of course, I should point out also here that, Paul's writings, and I have mentioned this already, but Paul's writings, his letters, do predate the Gospels. Those, of course, that everyone holds he is the author of. He knows about issues regarding marriage, the whole not I, but of the Lord. He knows about the institution of the Eucharist or the Last Supper with his disciples and how he was betrayed by a disciple. So Paul is aware of that. And I have here with a question mark, it is more blessed to give than to receive. The reason I have a question mark here is because some historians, wonder how reliable the book of Acts is. For myself, I think there are some issues in terms of theology regarding the book of Acts, but um, I don't completely think that a lot of the history is completely, you know, false or wrong or anything like that. But anyway, in the farewell speech to the Athenians, Paul makes a statement where he's quoting Jesus, where he states it's more blessed to give than to receive, which is not a statement of Jesus found in the canonical Gospels, but Paul seems to be aware of it. And death by crucifixion, which is referenced in Galatians and First Corinthians. So, Paul is aware of how Jesus was executed, how he died, that he died by crucifixion. Well, I think that we will stop here, but when we come back, we will look more at the historical Jesus. So, take care. I will symbolically see you then.